Thank you very much for the invitation to participate today. It's a privilege to follow Professor Douglas Scott's excellent lecture, and I'm thoroughly enjoying the insightful contributions of my fellow panelists here. I won't talk about Scotland, but just a couple of remarks to begin with. Reading the title of the debates this year on the unity of a nation, I remembered Richard Rose's 1982 book on understanding the United Kingdom, and there was an element within that book where he talked about the weakness of nationhood associated with the state of the United Kingdom. Nobody talks about the Ukrainians as a people, and of course we can talk about Britain and Britishness as a form of nationhood, but to an extent that is unusual comparatively. The UK has been reasonably comfortable, at least in identity terms, if not institutionally, with its status as a plurinational or multinational state composed of 4 nations, England, Scotland, Wales, and Britain, and as was just pointed out eloquently by Christopher, one territory where nationhood is contested. For me, the unity of the UK as a nation, or Britain as a nation, has become clearly quite deeply politically contested, and it's not for me as a scholar to reify political unity. We can, of course, analytically consider the factors most likely to preserve or undermine that unity, but not to make a judgment that values political unity over alternatives. Political unity in the UK context clearly is about the union, or more properly, a series of unions between each of the smaller territories in England. My remarks will be focused on what's sometimes referred to as the Anglo-Scottish Union, but really the union that ties Scotland to the rest of the UK. Now, that union faced its most explicit test in 2014, at the time of the independence referendum, where 45% voted for independence and 55% voted against. And the key takeaways I would take from that referendum was, at that time, it was an historically high demonstration of support for Scottish independence, and it has provided something of a base for the independence movement since then. It was also a consensual process. The UK government at the time provided politically calculated perhaps, but nonetheless pragmatic response to a majority government's electoral mandate for an independence referendum. We didn't have, as was discussed in the earlier panel, we didn't have the situation of a UK constitutional provision on the indissoluble unity of the United Kingdom. And clearly, as events of 100 years ago have shown, clearly the UK is divisible, if that's where politics takes us. The final takeaway from 2014 is there was no particular reason to have a referendum at that time, apart from the fact that the SNP secured a parliamentary majority. There was no evident dissatisfaction with Scotland's place within the Union. There was no grievance around which support for independence was mobilised. There was conversely broad satisfaction with devolution and Scotland's status as a devolved nation within the United Kingdom. Brexit has changed things. Both Brexit as a fact and Brexit as a process. The fact of Brexit, the fact that a UK-wide referendum took the UK as a whole out of the European Union in such a way that couldn't reflect the plurinational preferences of the different constituent territories, has been problematic. It has, in the words of the often repeated phrases of the First Minister and others in Scotland, it has taken Scotland out of the EU against its will. If you think of that expression in terms of the self-government, rights of self-determination and so on, the idea of the people's will not being able to be reflected in UK political decisions. But the Brexit process too has proven problematic, as Professor Douglas Scott discussed very eloquently in her lecture. Brexit has, to some extent, undermined devolution by undermining the Sewell Convention on numerous occasions and Brexit-related legislation, by recentralising authority in the UK government, in terms of the UK government's status vis-à-vis the devolved governments, not least within last year's legislation on the United Kingdom internal market. Michael referred in his contribution to the importance of self-rule plus shared rule, and I agree completely. But what the Brexit process revealed was the profound weakness of shared rule in the UK system of multi-level government. And there are some concerns emerging now, particularly around the Internal Market Act legislation, that the Brexit process may be undermining elements of self-rule too. The Brexit process coupled with a more assertive unionist, union building strategy on the part of the UK government. So does that mean that the union's days are numbered in Scotland? Well, I would say that Brexit is the reason that independence is the dominant issue in Scottish politics. It has created a catalyst. It has created a sense of injustice around which support for independence is being remobilized. So the catalyst that was absent in 2014 is very present now. But there is no consensual process now. Legally, it will be difficult to secure an independence referendum without the consent of the UK Parliament and the UK government, and impossible to secure a negotiated secession without their consent. And there is no prospect, in my view, of the Scottish government pursuing a Catalan approach in a non-consensual way. Brexit, especially the form that it has assumed in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, has also complicated independence. Mobilised it, yes, but created more practical difficulties, not least around the status of the land border between England and Scotland. And although it has created modest increases in support for independence, and perhaps more significantly, it's changed the demographic profile of those who support independence, it's still an issue that divides Scotland. It's not one that we can see as being the settled will of the Scottish people, a phrase that was used previously to talk about the Scottish Parliament. Independence is definitely not the settled will, but more problematically, neither is union, neither is unity. So finally then, Professor Douglas Scott talked about many alternatives between independence and the union as currently configured, and I agree with that. Michael also talked about revising mechanisms of shared rule as another alternative. There's a couple of things I see as perhaps limiting these as options, at least for now. One is, and there was a phrase used in the first panel this morning around the spirit of federalism. We don't really have a very strong spirit of federalism in the UK. That would require a commitment to solidarity, a commitment to unity, a commitment to diversity, not just in terms of identity, but diversity in terms of a commitment to sharing and diluting the power of the centre. There's not much evidence of that, certainly not within the current administration. And in Scotland, it's also doubtful that that would secure consent unless and until an independence referendum is permitted. The other constraint I see on constitutional options within the United Kingdom is the relationship with the European Union. Brexit, and the fact of Brexit, complicates and limits, in a sense, federal type options as being ones likely to secure consent, because it's very difficult to foresee within those options a way in which Scotland could have a distinctive relationship with the European Union. There was a compromise position offered, quite problematic in practice, I think. So unless and until the United Kingdom's own relationship with the European Union was to change, I think the EU fact that will inevitably impinge on the territorial dynamics within the United Kingdom that we are seeing now. So I guess I'm kind of concluding in a similar way to the way that Christopher did in relation to Northern Ireland. The UK-EU relationship and how it evolves has and will continue to have a profound effect on the internal territorial dynamics within these islands. Thank you.